thanks Plato for organizing sessions like these. I think they're very educational and also a lot of fun. So I'm first going to talk a bit, before we go into the Ask Me Anything session, a bit about transparency, which is a core value at GitLab. A little bit about me. I'm based in Atlanta. I've been at GitLab about 2 years now. 20 years of experience in security and engineering. I read quite a bit, and a little bit more about me, some links there. So the agenda, I'm going to set the stage. Who is GitLab? Talk about some examples of transparency in various parts of the organization. Talk about some benefits and some risks of transparency and how you can apply transparency in your organization. Some of these transparency quotes I found, so it's worth reading them. Honesty and transparency make you vulnerable. Be honest and transparent anyway, by Mother Teresa. And a lack of transparency results in distrust and a deep sense of insecurity, by the Dalai Lama. Short blurb on GitLab is the open DevOps platform for source code management, development planning, security, performance monitoring, security monitoring, and a whole bunch of other things. One tool that meets many, many different needs, both as a hosted service and something you can run yourself in your own environment. Great for collaboration as well. So who and where are we? We have about 1,300 employees in 65 or more countries and regions. We've been all remote since 2015, 0 offices. There actually is a physical address. It's a mailbox drop-off somewhere in San Francisco. It's an open source product that gets thousands of contributions every year from close to 1,000 different people in the community. So those are non-team members, non-employees that do that. In addition, of course, the work done by employees. And the product is delivered where customers host it themselves. They run it on our cloud services. There's a free community edition for anyone to run themselves. There's free tier accounts on our cloud services and free accounts for specific open source projects. We've got a little map there of where a number of the people are. So what are our values? Our values include collaboration, results, efficiency, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, iteration, and transparency. And I have a number of links in the presentation that you can search for and find later on the values. We're not only transparent about how we develop things and what the features are, et cetera, but also about our entire company handbook on how we operate. So you can actually find everything that I'm presenting is all public information on the internet. And it's great information now. Transparency. We try to be transparent about as many things as possible. We start out by making things transparent and only make it confidential if we need to. This really gives us a lot of capabilities to coordinate and collaborate internally with team members, with our community members that are working on our products and services as well, but also with customers, with the general public, with prospects, with competitors, with just anybody out there. And we get a lot of feedback, which is great and really helps us to collaborate inside and outside the company. Transparency is quite uncommon in many, many technology companies and definitely rare in the security domain. So a little bit about transparency in general at GitLab. We'll talk about some selected examples in transparency that I've noticed and thought would be great to bring to the group's attention. Strategy. Our strategy and most of our product plans are public. This allows us to effectively communicate amongst team members or employees, customers, open source users, and the general public, and our competitors, and attackers who are attacking our services, and people who may want to work at GitLab. And they're learning about how we're doing what we're doing, and people who just want to learn about our strategy and want to take portions of it to do and implement their own strategies, learn about how we do it, and also contribute, as we take contributions not just on our product from the public, but on our handbook, on how we operate, and it's great. When I first saw this, when I came to the company, I thought, wow, this really helps me to understand the strategy, and wow, this tells our competitors what we're doing. And the value of this is far outweighs the risk. So why is this page public? I did a little screenshot of that as well. Our strategy is completely public because transparency is one of our values. We're not afraid of sharing our strategy. There's a quote from Peter Drucker: strategy is a commodity, execution is an art. Requirements. So a little closer to engineering details. So requirements and epics and associated issues are not confidential by default. Security issues, sometimes things are confidential. Security issues are confidential to the public until they're fixed, and we handle it that way. So we want to make the fix available before we make the issue public so that we can have fixes available before it starts getting exploited. So requirements are available to everybody at the company. Benefits, we get feedback from everyone with access. This collaboration improves the overall plan. I've got an example one here. I'll give an example of today is one of my teams is working on introducing Kafka for open source Kafka for pub sub architecture inside GitLab. And we created the requirements and issues, and they're public. These happen to be public 100%. They're also public, of course, inside the company. And another team saw that and started saying, hey, we're thinking about implementing Kafka too. Let's trade ideas so we can best improve how we implement it. And if these things weren't transparent inside the company, at least we wouldn't be getting feedback. In this collaboration, sometimes we also make changes where we're going to incorporate an open source project or talk about using a commercial vendor or things like that. And we get feedback from the public. I've been very, very pleased in how often that happens and it really strengthens the requirements. So sometimes a risk is sometimes something is not confidential until after it should have been. It leaves us open during that short time window for negative outcomes. To my knowledge, at least, this has only been a theoretical risk. It hasn't actually resulted in anything negative that I've at least been a part of. There's an example of an epic here on providing developers access to production-like data, a very important thing. There were 5 people collaborating on it and actively working on it or commenting on it, and 12 people watching it, keeping track of it. Transparency in code. Merge requests, or in other systems known as pull requests, that are part of the community edition are public. We also use a bug bounty program, HackerOne, and publish the details after the fix is available to customers. Merge requests, changes to the code, are available to everyone at the company. So we get feedback from everyone with access. The collaboration improves the time to resolve issues and the qualityness and the thoroughness of the fix. Let's get an example of a security issue here. I chose a security issue because often those are things that are not dealt with transparently at many companies, and for good reasons. We decided to do that. So it was one report from the bug bounty program, one issue, 7 different merge requests, 10 people who commented on it, and 25 people watching it. And it really improves, again, the time to resolve, the quality and the thoroughness of the fix, and overall just improves trust as well, both between team members and employees, our community of open source contributors, and also the public. Security testing. So we use our own security tools that are part of the GitLab product to do the security testing for secure code scanning, dynamic scanning, dependency checking, secret scanning, and other things. The results are available for all employees. All employees. This facilitates great collaboration inside and outside the company in finding, vetting, and resolving the security issues. And it really does help, again, to get feedback across the organization to resolve security issues and other types of things quickly and thoroughly. Security incident handling. Security incidents are open to all employees. This allows employees to collaborate on them, speeding resolution and the quality of the response. Got some details here. And it's not just security incidents, but actually outage incidents as well. If there's an outage, availability issue, a performance issue, etc., those will also be things that we make public whenever we can. The people that are impacted, whether they're free users or open source users or paying customers, get to see that detail. We collaborate on them internally as well, and that's all. That information, when it's a public issue, is done publicly, and it works so well to gain that trust and also to increase the collaboration and the information sharing. Employee data, not engineering or development specific, but our org chart is public. It has name, title, location, reporting structure, a picture, some other data. So the benefits, great communication between employees, customers, and the general public. Risks, it can encourage phishing and other fraud. So we have other controls in place to reduce and monitor those risks. It's one of those other things where we really work hard to be transparent about things, and we account for the risks in doing that, but the benefits far outweigh them in terms of the transparency, the collaboration, and that trust that we get between people. Endpoint protection. So we implemented endpoint protection and took feedback from the employees. where it wasn't implemented. This is a while ago, and I was involved with this. It generated close to 8,000 comments from hundreds of employees. That was a lot to go through and to get their buy-in and respond to. And we couldn't respond to everything. Actually, we could respond to everything. We couldn't incorporate everybody's feedback because some of the feedback wouldn't have met our needs, but some of it surely did. And we had all that great collaboration to get to a place where people trusted why we were doing this, how we were doing it. And did we bring everybody along with this? No, surely not. Did it take a lot of effort? Absolutely. But it's something that at many companies would be, where you weren't being transparent about it, it would be kind of a hammer brought down on team members where they wouldn't appreciate it and kind of lose their trust. And we didn't bring everybody along, but I'd say 95%, 98% plus. They may have not gotten exactly what they wanted with this, but they were heard and they felt heard, and it really improved our overall plans to not only get buy-in, but improve the rollout. We made a number of changes to this rollout based on the feedback from the team members. Phishing testing. We phished our own employees. We sent them emails trying to get them to click on things that they shouldn't click on, and which, of course, all companies should do. But we also published the results to the public to say what we learned, what we're doing, and it served the general security community. This is an interesting one, is you wouldn't necessarily expect this to anybody really to care too much about it, but the Register picked it up, and they actually wrote an article about it, which is pretty interesting. So being transparent can get you also exposure to things. And this article, I would imagine, also perhaps interested people to work for GitLab in the security, on the various security teams. Because we're being transparent about it, it allows us to attract employees as well, which is great. Transparency and compliance. Our compliance framework is public. It creates trust with customers and auditors. A unique aspect of that. So what are the benefits and risks of transparency from an engineering perspective? So benefits: increased collaboration, team velocity, you can get more code out and quicker, reduced time to resolve incidents and bugs, so outages, performance issues, and the bugs themselves. Increased thoroughness of resolutions, since you get more feedback from more people. You can look at more aspects of whatever the challenges were to not just work on the issue that occurred, but other similar things could potentially occur. Increased trust with employees and customers. If people don't know information, it's human nature often to assume the worst. So if you're transparent about things, it may not be what people want or are expecting, but you have that trust with them, and they're not going to assume something that might be worse is the case. It also allows iterative improvement. Some of the risks, because there definitely are risks: risk of accidental or intentional leaks of confidential information, and increased collaboration equals increased effort in vetting and responding to feedback. If you ask for feedback and don't respond, that's likely going to backfire. So you really do need to respond to the feedback if you ask for it. You may not agree with it. So it's important to, in my opinion, respond to all feedback. Thank them for it because they're spending the time to give you that feedback. Tell them what you agree with and what you don't. Tell them what you're going to do and what you're not. And don't make guarantees on what you're going to do, but only promise things you feel confident are going to happen. So at least they know. And that really does help to get a lot of feedback and to have that trust and deal with the risks of those increased collaboration. But do be prepared, especially if it's something controversial, for significant feedback. How can you apply this to your organization? Show the examples, benefits, and risks. Start small. Lower risk items before high risk items to manage the risk while showing value. So an example, if you're not being transparent about security issues inside the organization that are identified, maybe start with low severity ones, rated by CVSS score or whatever way you look at the priority. And then be transparent about those before doing the higher risk ones and see how it goes to show that it can be valuable and reduces the time to resolve those things. But also, you don't have those risks of those things being exposed publicly before you're ready, etc. Also, then iteratively increase scope while documenting the outcome. So increase the scope of what kinds of things you're going to be transparent about, and then document those outcomes as you go so people can learn about them and document them transparently as well if you can. And highlight where transparency improved the outcomes. Look at how things have improved and how trust improves. Employee surveys show more positive things, and time to resolve issues, and the speed at which new features can be developed. Because those things will often come when being more transparent. It's something that GitLab definitely relies upon to do that. And I think you may see that too. So before I take questions and turn it over to Veena, I want to say I'm also hiring. We are hiring at GitLab on many different teams for Ruby on Rails, Golang developers, front-end developers, product managers, etc. So please check out our job listings.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Wayne. This was a great summary, and I think the topic of transparency, is spans so many different facets. It's amazing to see you walking through all of us. So there are a few questions, and to everyone else, have more to ask Wayne, please put them in the Q&A section. And then we can get started on the Q&A. Before we start, a little about me. I did not introduce. I'm Veena. I'm a senior director of engineering at WeWork. And WeWork has gone through a lot of changes in the last couple of years, and this topic of how to be transparent around org changes, the product pivoting, to how we design and architect and introduce new technology and kind of create that culture has been very important to me. So I'm very happy to moderate this with Wayne. Awesome. So the first question, I think that's very near and dear again, is some companies like Glassdoor, Level 25 have kind of made the salaries public. The question from you, John Shrestha, is what are some of the benefits and risks of making salaries public? And I think another related topic is how about making billing rates and profits of the company public, and pros and cons to that.
It's a great question. Thanks, Veena. And thanks for the help with all this. And thank you, John, for the question. So benefits and risks of salaries public is GitLab used to make salaries public to the general public on not on a per team member basis or employee basis, but what the range is for each role. And it is no longer public to anyone. It's public to all employees, all team members, and anybody who applies for a job. Then they can access it. We give them an ID to access it. And I'm not sure the exact reason for doing that, but that was a change that was made recently. But I think it's great that team members, current team members, and people who are interviewing know the ranges, and they can decide if those work for them or not, and give us feedback, etc. And give it really, that transparency reduces that anxiety that people have over what they're being paid and how they're being paid, and know that it's equitable across teams and across roles, etc. About billing rates and profits public, talking about what the company revenue is, you have to be very careful about that. Of course, when you're a public company, which I am not a part of, at least not currently, and I was in the past at past jobs, where you have to be very careful about that. So that's something to watch for compliance reasons. It's a bit harder to do, but if you can, it can be great, but it also has some negatives as well. So that's usually one of the things that companies are not, even companies that are very transparent, are not transparent about publicly, including GitLab.
Awesome, thank you. And there's another amazing question around, from Abhishek Chakrabarty. Can external transparency work for all kinds of companies, especially if they aren't in the open source domain? I think you touched upon a lot of the code and the products that you're building could be open source, but for companies that don't do that, I think he's specifically wondering how would that work?
Yeah, that's a great question, Abhishek. Thank you. I think it definitely can. So GitLab is an open source company, but not all of the code is open source. Not all of a portion of it is only available to paid customers. And we are transparent about a large portion of our plans for that, how we do that. And we, in most cases, don't treat that any differently. So in terms of being transparent about the code, if the code is confidential for the company, then perhaps you can't be transparent about that. And often companies aren't. But how the company operates, what the issues are being worked on, what the tasks are being worked on, what the features are, you can get so much feedback. Even if it's a closed source product, from a code perspective, getting that feedback from users, from the community, et cetera, can be really, really valuable, both being transparent about that inside the company and outside the company in terms of great collaboration and trust. So I would start small if you're not doing it today in being transparent about those kinds of things publicly, and then show that value and then increasing it iteratively over time.
Thank you. We have another question here. I think they've been upvoted by a few folks. It's a very interesting one from Charles McCraw. Hope I got the name right. Apologies if not. So the question is, has there been criticism about this transparency from employees internally or externally? Maybe to take a few examples and provide things that did not work out.
I would say it's another great question. That's why I love doing these sessions like this. Is all the great questions I tend to get. So I don't think there's been that much. The criticism internally is often, why are we not being transparent about something? Not why we are transparent. So occasionally there's something we're on the fence. Can we be transparent about something in terms of, like, it contains financial information, but not really. And sometimes it's very clear, sometimes it's in a gray area, and then we'll talk about it, or whether we can make something transparent or not. So it's usually people wanting to make things more transparent, and it's a culture thing, and you have to kind of live a culture to learn it. Not kind of, you have to, in my opinion. And some people, when they come to GitLab, it's very alien to them. And for me, it was very alien to me in many ways. I liked the concept, but I had not operated in a company like that previously. So I had a team meeting earlier today with a new team that was founded in applied machine learning. We post our meetings to YouTube publicly. And I don't know who watches them, except for people who might be interested in what features we're building, hear how we talk about them, and potential new employees. I'm going to be hiring on that team very soon, and that's great. And I've heard that from prospects that we've talked to, potential candidates, that that's how they decided they wanted to be interested in GitLab, is they can see how the team operates. So that's usually the criticism internally, is to make things more transparent. Occasionally, there's some things that people want to make less transparent, where there's concerns about, is it something that's covered? And we have an explicit list. It's in the handbook. That's public. It says what we can be transparent about and what we can't be. And we do update that often as needed. And it's usually something that where people think, well, we said this publicly, but not yet. Or an example, we did a thing where we did a press release, and we didn't want the information going out publicly until the press release was announced. So we said, please don't talk about this publicly. But we announced it internally. And we said, you can talk about it after noon on this day, because that's when the press release goes out. And there was risk of that being exposed early, which would not have been good, but it didn't happen, and it tends to not happen, and we're willing to take those risks. In terms of externally, occasionally in a support issue or an issue about when a customer reports an issue, we have a tracking system for support requests, and then there'll be bugs created if it's a problem in the code. Sometimes people put the customer name in the bug because they want to make sure we're tracking all the details, and that might be public, that issue, and the customer doesn't want to be talked about publicly. So that's happened occasionally, where a customer says, hey, thank you for working on our problem, but please take our name off this, and we'll do that. It doesn't happen that often, but it does happen occasionally. Usually it's the opposite though, is we've made an issue private, or a merge request private, or there's a reference to a document that we've not made public, and somebody wants us to make it public. And often we can, and sometimes we can't. So it's usually, I'd say 90% of the complaints are about making things, people want to make things more transparent, not less, but occasionally it's about making it less.
Thank you. And so the summary seems to me that internally people want more transparency, and and then the external. I think we have to find a balance, and I look forward to it. I have a follow-up question. It's not a question on this. in a culture, and I think I can relate to what some of the folks are saying, in a culture that doesn't support transparency from the top down, right? GitLab might be a great example where founders to the CEO and everyone has the core value defined and they live up to it. In some cases, it might not be the case. So, what are some of your recommendations and tips to us on how, from grassroots of bottoms up, we could kind of build a culture of transparency?
It's a great question. If it's not supported up the leadership chain, that can be very, very challenging. I would start small and potentially be only transparent internally, but wider than is currently done internally on something, and show the value. Show that the velocity of a team that's making all their issues or tasks available to anybody at the company goes up, and no risks occurred, no negative outcomes occurred, and then start building on that. So talk about what it was, what it is now, what you've done, and then what you recommend to increase it further. So start small on low risk things, and then increase from there. Some organizations, they're not going to be very transparent. Some can't be on various things, very transparent at all. If it's for various reasons, and but I think most organizations are less transparent than they actually can be. And it's kind of letting go and being okay with taking some risk in order to increase collaboration and efficiency.
Yeah, Ping on the list has a question. Why do you think most companies are not transparent, either internal or external, outside the company? And I think you alluded a little bit to it. So, what would be your assessment of the companies that choose not to be transparent?
That's a great question, and thanks, Ting. It's if a company is not transparent, they're protecting secrets. And some companies are very non-transparent and very successful. So, for example, I never worked there, but the reading I've done on Apple is not transparent by intent, and they're very successful not being transparent. They compartmentalize information and projects, etc., and very, nobody can fault all their successes. So they're successful with it. That most companies get a lot of value out of. So why are companies not transparent? They're feared that their secrets will get out and their competitors will get their hands on them, or customers will get upset, or employees will get upset. So even GitLab was wildly transparent. Isn't transparent about everything. We transparent about quite a bit, but not everything. So you have to make the decision about what you can be transparent about and what the risks are, and not overplaying those risks. So many organizations have worked in a non-transparent way for so long. It's so hard to change that mindset. It's hard to do, but it's really, really valuable. And not having a black and white situation where 99% you can't be transparent about unless it's on the public website and approved by marketing. Some companies operate that way, and that's okay, but you really don't get the value out of your team members, your employees, and feedback from your customers and the public if you do that.
Totally understand, and I think I've worked in a few places that fall in the bucket of the being more open about their competitive to the competitors, and some are not. It has its pros and cons.
Transparency is
Yeah,
scary.
yeah,
Transparency is scary until you get used to it, and then it's less scary.
yeah. I think there's a question from Andy Lay. Are there any concerns about being too transparent that it puts you in a rough position with your competitors? And if there are, can you talk more about it? And I think it's related to the topic we were just discussing, why some
Yeah.
companies choose to do the.
And thanks, Andy. So you can be too transparent, and your competitors might copy you. If they're copying you, they're not being they're not being innovative on their own. And yes, maybe they copy you and they get something to market quicker, etc. But your competitors are learning about what you're doing anyway. They're learning because you often have the same customers, and you're talking to the same people. And if you're protecting slide decks and ask people not to share them, some of your customers are sharing your slide decks with your competitors. I almost guarantee it, and it happens really often. I've personally not done that, but I know it happens. So it's hard to keep secrets. So it's more about execution on plans, is iterating quickly, getting feedback, iterating more, building things, getting feedback, building more, taking that feedback and focusing on your users. That's, in my opinion, how to win, and not as much keeping secrets. But of course, there are use cases in the opposite direction, like Apple, where they're very secretive and they're very successful doing that. But I think in my opinion, they're the exception case. And the more the companies are transparent, the more successful they can be if they're transparent about the right things, because it gets that trust with your employees and all that collaboration with both your employees and your customers.
Yeah, just like Tesla is an example where they made a lot of their patents public and being very transparent about their technology. So I think it goes both ways. Um, there's a question again from Yurjan. It is probably easier to things being more transparent. What happens if you make a mistake? I think there was a case of the things that we sometimes discuss and that are confidential and people make it public before it needs to go. So he says, how do you justify making something private again? Or change the policy around transparency? And can you describe some examples of that situation in GitLab?
Yeah, it's another great question. And what we do is we do a blameless root cause analysis, a blameless RCA, on outages, on security issues, and if something was transparent when it shouldn't have been. Publicly, we look at it, we don't blame the person, that's the blameless part, we blame the people involved. We look at what technologies and what processes we have for making the decisions and update them. And GitLab has said things publicly and then that we thought would not be controversial at all with our user base before we were really had the full idea fully evolved, and got a lot of negative feedback from the public. We apologized, and one of the apologies came from our CEO as an email to all our customers. This is about around the time I started, and we fixed it. We apologized. We fixed it. We said how we're going to vet those kinds of decisions in the future, and it worked. It worked quite well. If you don't do that, say, oh, we were transparent about Project X. We're never going to be transparent about Project X again. You're throwing out all the good with the bad. It's more doing that root cause analysis really does that and helps. And it helps you get that confidence. You can be transparent from the get-go, by default, transparent by default, rather than only on occasion. Do you have any examples, Veena, from your experiences at WeWork?
Oh, totally. And so it's just, remembering when you said in the first slide, being transparent makes you vulnerable. And I think that's quality the leaders from the top to down have to embrace. If you just accept that mistakes do happen and it's part of the process, right? And the example you gave about if it's the right thing to do, apologize, right? That's the external piece, and even in the internal side, internally, not everyone would have the full um, assessment of the impact something leaked or something exposed before the right time is happens. So I think in those cases it comes down to again a culture of talking about it, some in a one-on-one conversation, or some more publicly if need be, and rebuilding the culture of protecting the information. So it's happened quite a bit at WeWork, and if you see the last 18 months, there was a lot of changes in WeWork, and some of the information was shared in a lot of confidence to create transparency, and it was leaked outside without much thought. So I think it's part of the culture which embraces that if you've put transparency as a core value, that you will also handle the not so good outcomes of it in a graceful way. So apology being one of them. Again, talk about it internally and go from there. So that's my take, Yojan. That was an amazing question. Kind of related to that, I think Charles has a bit of a few more questions around. And Ian Turjan has like, what role does the size of the organization have in the implementation of different aspects of transparency? Example, a small company might have unique risks for transparency in wages if you make the salary and data public.
It's a great question, Ian, and it's hard, especially about compensation. I think if you communicate bands of compensation based on experience level and responsibility level, et cetera, it helps. But your developers are talking anyway. Even if you ask them not to, they still are. Not every single one. So, shining a light on it really helps to improve the trust and removes the distrust between team members, between the team members or employees and the company. So I think actually transparency is even more important the smaller the organization because they know anyway. And if they don't know something and you're not being transparent about it, they might assume the worst because also the company is so small, they're wondering, why don't I know? Now, if you have challenges where somebody's releasing information publicly often that they shouldn't be, or inside the company transparently that they shouldn't be, do a blameless root cause analysis to figure out what happened. Were the processes good? Was the technology good? Was it accidental? If it becomes a pattern, talk to that person, and it might be a performance issue for that person if they're not following the policies of the company. If it happens repeatedly, the benefits of transparency so improve the ability for the company to deliver on its goals. It's worth it in many situations, most situations, in my opinion. But you do have to watch those risks. The risks on a large company are also interesting. I talked to somebody at a large security company a couple weeks ago, and they had a challenge where they were transparent about security issues inside the company only. And they said, do not discuss this with customers until we're ready to release a patch. Well, the salesperson released the information to one of their customers because they wanted to gain that customer's trust, saying, hey, this is coming. You're going to have to patch tomorrow or patch next week. And it was really unfortunate because then somebody at that customer released that information publicly, and it was a big public relations problem because they weren't ready to release the patch yet. And it was released early, and other customers were very upset about that. So there are those kinds of challenges. Now, I believe what they did is they said, we're not releasing security information inside the company anymore, outside the specific team that is doing it, which is how they decided to respond. I think another way to do it is look at the process. Was it communicated well? Has this person done it before, et cetera? And maybe not release to everyone, but maybe a subset of people that's bigger than the current, and get that understanding and that trust. But it is the size of the company, both small and large, definitely impact what you can be transparent about and how you're transparent about it.
Thank you. Next question is from Vishaka Goyal. He says, hi, Wayne. Any tips for well-established companies to make their employees feel comfortable during the process of being transparent? And this is very, I think, a very subtle one, but very nice question. Yeah.
It's a great question, Vishaka. It's starting small and documenting what other companies do and showing, you can use GitLab as an example. You can use Tesla as an example in many cases. Use what WeWork does and others, and look at what they do and say, well, here's how we're similar. Here's how we're not. So for the things where we're similar, here's the benefits they get. Let's look at the benefits we could get and how we can manage those risks, and start small and then building on that and showing the value, and then building, iteratively improving to increase the scope and increase the type of things and increase the teams. And I'd say also is establish that root cause analysis process in advance. So you have it if something happens you don't want to see happen, so you can go and improve it and not just shut the whole thing down, but improve things over time while managing the risks, while also showing the value, and compare when teams are transparent about things versus not.
Yeah, and I can add a little bit to it, and like in a sense that there's a macro employee, salary, wage, and competitive spectrum transparency, but also at an engineering and product level, I constantly wonder, like a simple, we try to make create more public Slack channels when you're discussing about product ideas and engineering architecture, and versus having private. So if someone who joins new to the company, or someone outside of engineering has ideas, they be able to participate, right? So it starts even with small things, as Wayne said, that bringing about transparency in how we work may not necessarily come top down all the time. A lot of grassroots work, using code and Git to kind of open source models of the Git stuff to show that we welcome ideas from every corner, I think goes a long way in building that culture internally. And I think at WeWork we've been doing, and especially with a lot of churn, like anybody could participate in technical conversations or product ideas, and some sort of cultural things we do with hack days, right? Those all kind of bring about transparency on what every corner of the groups in engineering are doing. So just to add to that, Vishaka, if you're part of smaller or bigger, these things can happen from teams within. Alrighty, there's another question here from you, John. Do you have a process or team retrospectives to suggest more transparency? Do new ideas for transparency come mainly from the top or the bottom? Yeah.
So I can tell you, the ideas for transparency come from all parts of the company. It's kind of the company's. It's not kind of. It is the company's culture to where everybody can contribute, which is great, and that includes on what we can be transparent about versus not. We default to being transparent, so it makes it a little bit easier. But I've seen a new team member in their first week make a suggestion by doing an MR to the handbook to improve transparency. And sometimes we'll see things all the way from the CEO saying, wait, in a meeting I was in with him, I'll hear him say, well, why aren't we transparent about X? This video is private or this issue is private, and I don't see a reason for it to be. So it starts at the top and at the bottom and in the middle. Do we have a team retrospective to suggest more transparency? Not particularly, because we default to being transparent. But I think that's a great idea for a company starting out with transparency, is to do those team retrospectives about that, to do that. And for example, some of my teams that report up to me, some of them we can be transparent about what we do. Some, it's hard to do so because we discuss financial information, like the fulfillment team that processes orders and renewals, et cetera. And most of the time we're talking about engineering things, how we're going to write the code and architect it and how we're going to deal with a bug, et cetera. Sometimes we'll say, well, if we do this, it'll raise revenue by X. And that's something we can't say publicly. So one thing I've seen in many meetings and discussions at GitLab is to have a public part of the meeting and then a private part, public meaning to the general public, and then saving things that we can't be transparent about to a second part of the meeting that's not to the public. It's something some of my teams are not doing currently, but something we've talked about doing in retrospectives and team retrospectives. To do that, you have to have that muscle memory to do that if a team wants to, but it can be very valuable.
Awesome. There's one question from Siddharth Astana has been very happy to say that he is a sophomore in the year and he's the first MR got merged in the GitLab yesterday, and he feels very great about it. And I think it's a very interesting question. What is your favorite thing about GitLab?
And first up, thanks Siddharth for the merge request, and awesome that it got merged. And awesome that you're in school and able to contribute to GitLab as well. We really like when students use it, when open source projects use it, et cetera. So that's awesome. Please keep it up. And again, thank you. So you feel great about it. It is neat to see it part of the product, isn't it? I feel the same when I make changes. So what's my favorite thing about GitLab? Well, transparency is really important to me. One thing on a personal level I really like is the company has team members, or AKA employees, around the world and not centralized. Many companies say around the world and they're centralized in North America and Western Europe. Not GitLab. We have quite a few people in North America and Western Europe, but we have quite a few people across the world. My team, which is about 50 people in total, I think spreads across 14 time zones. 14. So I don't have time zone overlap with all of them, but I get to meet people from various parts of the world. We discuss both work things and non-work things, hobbies, just what's going on in their part of the world. So I learn a lot about different cultures and a lot about different parts of the world, regions, etc. And I really like, there are many things I like about GitLab. That's transparency is one of them, and also the international nature is another.
Great. Siddharth, hopefully that's, Vein feels amazing about their MR, and keep it coming, keep more and more of them coming. Ava is a question again. Now that you've highly value transparency, I think we've discussed about, why being, by default transparent and working through it is critical. You said, would it be very important criteria for your next job if you were to change the company?
It would definitely be one of the things I would look into, but not all companies. it's revolutionary in some way, in many ways, to be as transparent as GitLab is. So other companies, what do they need to be as transparent as GitLab to be successful, which is what would attract me to them? No. I'd say one thing that I've learned a lot about at GitLab is the diversity, inclusion, and belonging, which many companies have in their policies and try to do. GitLab really leans into this, and I think it's great. Team members feel psychological safety, and it's about various levels of diversity, et cetera. But it's great. I see it be really successful, and it's heartwarming how accepting the company is of people with various differences and encouraged, et cetera. So I'd say if another company didn't have that in check in terms of diversity, inclusion, and belonging, that would be a yellow flag or even a red flag for me. Transparency is a harder thing for companies. The diversity, inclusion, and belonging is something that many companies, most companies, actually, I think just about any company can do and should do.
Thank you. Wait, I have a follow-up on that. How now that we're planning to change, but if you're planning to change and look for new jobs as part of hiring, what kind of frameworks or tips you'd use to kind of gauge if the company culture supports these? What kind of questions would you ask, or what kind of groundwork would you do before talking to them?
It's a great question. So we have a very structured interviewing process where we have a standard areas, not standard questions, standard areas. And we try to make sure that across all the interviews we do, they're covered by at least one person and hopefully two. And we take really good notes. I actually tell people when interviewing them, I'm not multitasking. When I'm typing while you're talking, I'm taking really good notes to make them feel safe that, I'm not thinking that they're a lousy candidate and I'm just working on something else or responding to Slack messages. So a number of those questions are about value. So we ask about diversity and inclusion and belonging. We ask about entrepreneurship. We ask about efficiency. We ask about communication skills. We ask about how you handle dissension amongst the team and other things. And all these areas, not all the details, but most of the details are available all in the GitLab handbook on the kinds of things that we look for. One, so we interview very consistently and look for a great fit, but also so people know what they're getting into. They if they're not a good fit, and that's fine if they're not, they often self-select out and don't apply.
Thank you. We got more questions coming in. Again, Charles here has, are there good reads about transparency to provide resources to top management to lean towards more transparency?
That is a great question. I've actually, other than blogs I've come across over time and the GitLab handbook that talks about it, I haven't noticed anything, but I'm sure there's things out there, but I have actually not noticed anything. And if others have seen things on that and they have any recommendations, it'd be great to put it in the chat. I'd like to know about those too.
And I think I particularly, there are so many books about how very different companies function, and so many books about leadership. And there is, I think each one of them has, they stress about this core quality. And I also talk about risks and how to navigate that, when things don't go. So one of the books that I feel is about, there's an Amazon way of doing things, and I find that very interesting in my career, um, to adapt to. So I can put the name of the book there. So that's super, super helpful for me around how to kind of navigate these, the creative transparent culture, and also how do you navigate that, how do you bring about that change in the company.
It's a great question, Charles. And thank you, Veena, for the book recommendation.
Yeah, there's a lot of that also comes down to accountability creation when you're transparent, right? So kind of they're tied together. I think that builds trust. So it's like multifaceted. So very tough one to have that in one book. Eugene has a question. How do you make bonus and race criteria transparent without the criteria being too prescriptive or political? That's another
It's another great question, Eugene. All the questions are great. I appreciate all the questions, especially from Eugene. I think you had 4 or 5. So when we do promotions, for example, at GitLab, The promotions are, of course, announced internally. But we also publish the promotion doc that does follow a prescriptive process on what is documented, like how long it should be. You don't name specific people that gave recommendations for a promotion. You put what they said, but not who it was, to make it not have challenges with inclusion and favoritism, etc. But we make those documents public after the promotion is done. It actually makes it transparent about what the criteria is, why they're being promoted, and that really, really helps with setting the expectations, celebrating that person's promotion, and being transparent about why, so others know as well. In terms of bonus and raise criteria, it is documented in the handbook about how the bonus structure work, how the raises work, etc. And we are internally more transparent about some of those things than we are externally, but it is very, very valuable, and it gains so much trust, and it makes sure everyone's treated the same and is treated the same criteria. So there isn't favoritism, there isn't, or other things that would do that. It's just, it is very different for me because I'm not used to working in those kind of environments, but it's very refreshing as well.
Yeah, I mean, related to that, I think, Vishaka, is when we're global companies, yes, it's true. WeWork is very global in that sense too, and GitLab talked about so many zones that they work through. So how do you work on events? Example, having EMs from Europe versus EMs in Asia. Does such transparency create conflicts? I do have a take on that, but I'll let Dwayne start off with it.
Oh, go ahead, Veena.
Yes, so I think Vishak, goes back to kind of working closely, the leadership working closely with the human resources team, where especially when it comes to this, there's a lot of research data available on each of the regions on the pay bands, and Wayne alluded to it, right? So the exact pay may not be easy to make public, but the pay ranges and the pay bands. Something that also is critical is not just base salary. Usually, we focus on total compensation. There are so many perks and benefits that are sometimes very local to each region, right? So may not be relevant in US, but might be highly important and relevant in certain other parts of the globe. So I think that discussion usually starts off with leadership and human resources. One other piece of transparency is to be consistent, right? So if you're talking about and using a framework around how these bands are created and made transparent, and you remain consistent about it over the time, I think that really helps. So I think the source of conflicts usually happen when consistency is missing. So that's one key thing we focus on, I think, everywhere. Over to you, Wayne.
Yeah, let's say what GitLab does, we do make these internally transparent so people know the ranges, and we pay equitably per the cost of living in that region, which changes. So we update. I don't know if we change it quarterly or every 6 months, but I know there are often updates to those. And if a cost of living goes up in a specific region, we will go and update someone's pay accordingly as it gets reviewed. Can someone, living in a low cost of living area potentially get a job with a company that no matter where you live, you'll get San Francisco wages? Sure, that happens, and people sometimes leave for that reason, and that's fine if that's what's good for them. Making it equitable allows us to hire people in more places, and we do make sure that we're paying appropriately in various regions. Does it create conflicts? Sometimes, yes. Also, people move between regions, and there's a whole process for getting approved to do that. I haven't seen one not get approved. In my experience, I'm sure that's happened, but it does happen. I'm sure it does. We have a lot of people, especially pre-pandemic, that would move around a lot. I know of 2 people at GitLab that, one currently, one in the past, that lived in an RV, and we've been driving around North America, one in Canada, one in the US, living in different places. And I don't know how they do their per state or per taxes when they do that. I'm sure that's that perhaps is a challenge, but I'm sure that causes a challenge for our people ops team as well. But it's something that, if you get approval for it, we support. And I think that's just really neat. And, other people, they live part-time in one place where their family members are, and part-time in another place where their friends are. Especially in Europe, people seem to move around quite a bit to do that, and it works quite well. Or people or in North America, and then they go to, but they're originally from somewhere in Asia, and they go spend 3 months in Asia to spend time with family. It's a long trip, and they want to do that. And I know of team members that do that as well, and that having that flexibility is great.
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned the total compensation is not just the monetary aspect to it. There are a lot of flexible perks that people value a lot, so I think we incorporate those as well. Awesome. We're 1 minute in, so I
We'll
think
turn it back to Cappy.
yes, we should. And then again, thank you so much for everyone who participated. And Wayne, it's been super awesome to learn from you and listen to all of the recommendations you have. Thank you. Cappy, over.
I've learned a lot from you as well today.